Welcome to So Much Fun. I'm Colleen Murphy and I teach sewing. I talk to people all the time about sewing, and when people call, I ask them what their sewing experience is. And sometimes I get the reply, I don't know a thing about sewing. In fact, I can't even sew on a button. So today, I think we should learn how to sew on a button. So let's get started. Now, the first thing you are going to need to think about are your supplies and what kind of thread you're going to use. And it really depends on the garment. If you're putting a button on an outer garment, a heavy jacket or a coat, you want the heaviest thread you can get in order to keep that button on. So I'm showing here 4 different threads that you can possibly use based on the garment. Now this black one, it says on the end of the spool, it is cotton covered polyester, hand sewing for buttons, carpets, and crafts. So this one is probably the most sturdy thread of the 4 I have here. And that definitely would be one for a coat, I would say, or a very heavy jacket. All right, the next one, it says button craft. So it's definitely thread for buttons. It's a little bit lighter than the first one, just a little. Again, I would use this for an outer garment, like a jacket or a coat. The third one is, it says bold hand quilting. It doesn't even mention buttons, but hand quilting thread is much sturdier than your all-purpose thread. And this one even says bold hand quilting. So this one, I might use it for a lightweight jacket, all right? The last one is for hand quilting. And this is the one I would use if I were sewing a button on for a shirt or a blouse. It is much lighter weight, but it's much sturdier than your all-purpose thread. It's not that you can't use the all-purpose thread, but hand quilting thread has a little bit of a coating in it, and it's definitely stronger than the all-purpose. So think about what it is, what type of garment you're needing to sew on a button to help determine what type of thread you have. So that's one thing you have to think about. Now, if you are sewing again on an outer garment and it's a pretty good sized button, you might want to use toothpicks. Toothpicks allows you to get some slack in the space between the button and the fabric. Now, I'll have to be honest with you, I don't use toothpicks, but that's just me. I've been sewing for a very long time, and I'm able to hold the button in such a way that I can get that extra space in there without a toothpick. But a lot of people use toothpicks. Then another thing, when you're dealing with thread this thick, you are going to need a large eye needle. I don't think just a regular sewing needle will accept the thick thread. So for that reason too, you might want to use a needle threader. They're very handy. I have gotten so that I use them quite a bit now. My sight, I don't think is as good as it was 50 years ago. But these are the tools you'll need to sew on your button. Now let's talk about the different types of buttons. You have 2 categories basically. You have what we call the sew-through buttons, and it comes 2 ways. This one is a 2-hole sew-through button. This one is a 4-hole sew-through button. And you can, with a 4-hole, get real creative in how you sew that. This one you can see you've got parallel rows of thread. You could do an X, and I notice I'm going to do a button on a man's shirt. They do the X. And if you want to, you could do a feather. So it's all what you like to do with your style of sewing the button on. And the other category is shank. So the shank button doesn't have any holes in it, but underneath you've got an opening that you take your thread through to sew the button to the fabric. All right, today we're going to sew a button onto a man's shirt because I feel like more than likely there'll be more incidences of you needing to sew on a button, whether it's on a blouse or a shirt or maybe a dress, rather than an outer garment. I use the hand quilting thread like I showed you earlier, and I have it double strand, not single. And I'm first going to start and begin by taking your needle from the top of the fabric or shirt. You don't want the knot showing underneath. If you look at the other buttons, you see a little bit of thread, but you don't see a knot. All right, so you want the knot to be under the button is where you want it, not under on the underneath side of the shirt. Now this shirt, they did an X, so you want to duplicate what the shirt had. So you just take the needle through one of the holes, and then you take it through the other cross hole, I guess that's how we would say it. And I'm using the hand quilting thread. I'm not sure if I mentioned that before or not, but I'm using the hand quilting thread. So I see where my knot is, so I'm going to take the needle right in that hole and come up to the other side where there's thread and pull this. Now, like I say, you might want a little bit of slack. These are pretty close on blouses and shirts. There's not much of shank, if you want to call it, between the button and the garment. They're called being sewn on flat. I'm going to repeat this again, trying to go in the same holes that I did or close to it. Bring it up in the other corner hole. And I have to feel around. There it is. And I'm going to do this again. And I like to do things in threes. So I'm going to do this is the second time. And by holding my thumb on the button, I'm giving it a little bit of slack there. I'm going to have to look around here to see that again. And then I'm going to repeat that one last time. Come up in that hole, pull it slowly when you have two threads, and then go back through it. Probably can tell it's been a while since I've sewed on a button. All right, now that I've done that, now I want to go into the other two holes. So I take the needle into the fabric and I come up in the other hole and back through it. And I'm going to make sure I try to stay where those threads are and do it again. You know, if I were making a garment and I had buttons down the front, I would not sew it on by hand. I would use my sewing machine. One button, I'm going to do it by hand. It's too much trouble to set your machine up for one button. So you really do need to know how to sew on a button. All right, this was the third time. Once I've done it 3 times, I'm going to take the thread and I'm going to wrap it around underneath the button a couple of times like that. Then I'm going to make a knot, and the way I do it is I take the point of the needle, go into the fabric, and I try to come up in the thread. But when I do that, I want to take my 2 strands of thread and wrap it around the needle like that. And then I'm going to pull it. And that helps to make the knot. And I'm going to do it again. I'm going to take that needle, put it through the fabric and the thread, and wrap that thread around the needle and pull it. And one last time. Again, put it in the fabric, put it through the thread, wrap the thread around the needle, and pull it through. And I promise you that button is not going to come off. So I'm going to cut the thread, and we're finished. So it probably takes you maybe 5 minutes to do it. Okay? That's all there is to it. And you can get creative if you want to, but if you're sewing a button onto a garment, look at how the other buttons are sewn on so that you can duplicate what they are. I hope this video has been helpful for you and that you no longer will say, well, I can't even sew on a button. Now you'll be able to. Please like and subscribe and watch my other videos and have so much fun.